To be free means to be independent from the opinion of others. Arthur Schopenhauer. In a world obsessed with likes, followers, and external approval, few prisons are as suffocating as the silent need for female validation. Modern men, bombarded with images of status, beauty, and social clout, unconsciously tie their worth to how women perceive them. But Schopenhauer, with his unfiltered clarity, warned of this trap centuries ago. The relentless pursuit of validation from women is not a sign of strength or desirability. It is a subtle form of self-betrayal. When your self-esteem hinges on her attention, her approval, her acceptance, you are no longer your own man. You become a reflection of her whims, her moods, her reactions, and in that dependency, you surrender the core of your masculine power. This video will dissect why the need for female validation is one of the most self-destructive patterns a man can fall into. We'll explore how it weakens your presence, distorts your relationships, and most importantly, how to break free from this invisible chain. Subscribe if you're ready to rebuild your confidence from within. Like and stay with us as we reveal the inconvenient truth Schopenhauer knew all along. Schopenhauer's philosophy unveils a brutal but necessary truth. Human desire is a tyrant, never satisfied, always yearning, yet never delivering the lasting fulfillment it promises. Among the most deceptive forms of this tyranny is the modern, man's compulsive need for female validation. This need disguises itself as natural attraction, as the desire to be loved or admired, but in reality, it is a profound surrender of personal power. When a man bases his worth on how women perceive him, he unknowingly hands over the keys to his self-esteem. Every compliment becomes a fix, every glance a fleeting reassurance, and every rejection a devastating blow, not because of her, but because of the fragile identity he has outsourced. This dependency forms a vicious cycle. The more a man seeks female validation, the more fragile his sense of self becomes. He adjusts his behavior, suppresses his opinions, even compromises his values, all in the subtle hope of gaining approval. Yet, paradoxically, this very neediness repels the validation he craves. Schopenhauer teaches us that desire, when driven by insecurity, distorts perception. The woman is no longer seen as a person, but as a mirror reflecting back the man's unhealed wounds. Thus, the pursuit of validation becomes less about genuine connection and more about patching emotional voids. Culturally, this dynamic is exacerbated by media, social platforms, and societal narratives that glorify male desirability as a marker of success. The man who gets the girl is portrayed as superior, reinforcing the illusion that external approval is synonymous with internal worth. Schopenhauer would call this collective delusion a form of mass self-deception, an endless loop where men chase shadows, believing that being desired will resolve their inner dissatisfaction. Yet no amount of attention can substitute for self-acceptance. The moment a man depends on female validation, he becomes a slave to an unattainable standard, forever chasing the next hit of approval. On a psychological level, the need for female validation often traces back to unresolved childhood dynamics. Many men, consciously or not, carry emotional wounds from absent, critical, or emotionally distant maternal figures. As adults, they project these unmet needs onto romantic partners, seeking through them the recognition and nurturance they never fully received. Schopenhauer's concept of the will, as a blind, insatiable force, manifests here as a compulsive repetition of the same futile patterns. The man believes that if he can just win her approval, he will finally feel whole. But this belief is a mirage, forever retreating as he advances. The consequences of this dependency are far-reaching. Men who crave female validation often find themselves trapped in inauthentic relationships, unable to express their true selves for fear of losing approval. Their interactions become performances, their boundaries erode, and their emotional well-being becomes precariously tied to someone else's perception. Schopenhauer's philosophy of detachment offers a radical antidote. Liberation comes not from changing how others see you, but from changing how you see yourself. By severing the compulsion to seek external validation, a man reclaims his agency and, paradoxically, becomes more attractive, because his worth is no longer up for negotiation. The shift from needing validation to embodying self-worth is not an easy path. It requires a ruthless audit of one's beliefs, behaviors, and emotional triggers. Every moment of seeking approval becomes an opportunity for self-inquiry. Why do I need her to see me a certain way? What am I trying to prove? Schopenhauer teaches that through philosophical reflection and emotional discipline, one can transcend the grip of desire and cultivate inner stability. This is not a journey of cold detachment, but of profound self-connection. When a man no longer chases validation, he engages with women and the world from a place of authenticity and quiet confidence. At the heart of the need for female validation lies a deep psychological trap, the illusion that external approval can fill internal emptiness. Schopenhauer's philosophy dismantles this illusion by revealing the will's endless striving. No object of desire, no person's admiration will ever suffice. For the man ensnared by this dynamic, each compliment is a fleeting victory, each moment of attention a temporary salve. But as soon as that attention fades, the underlying void resurfaces, hungrier than before. This relentless cycle of craving and momentary satisfaction mirrors addiction. The man becomes dependent on intermittent rewards, much like a gambler awaiting the next win, not realizing the house always wins. This trap is insidious because it cloaks itself in socially accepted behaviors. Complimenting women, seeking to impress, conforming to trends, these actions are often seen as harmless, even positive, yet when driven by an underlying need for validation, they become self-erasing. The man subtly abandons his authentic self, replacing genuine expression with calculated performances aimed at eliciting approval. Schopenhauer's critique of the human tendency to deceive oneself is evident here. The man believes he is being nice or being attentive, but in truth, he is negotiating his identity for scraps of validation. Moreover, this dependency fosters emotional volatility. A man's mood, confidence, and even sense of worth become tethered to unpredictable external factors: her response, her mood, her attention. This external locus of control breeds anxiety, jealousy, and passive aggressiveness, further eroding his emotional stability. Schopenhauer's emphasis on inner detachment highlights the folly of such dependence. By allowing external circumstances to dictate one's inner state, a man forfeits his sovereignty, becoming a reactive, unstable version of himself. Social media magnifies this trap exponentially. Platforms designed to exploit attention and validation dynamics condition men to seek approval, not only from romantic interests, but from an endless audience. Likes, comments, and follows become digital proxies for self-worth. The same pattern Schopenhauer described in human desire: unceasing craving, fleeting satisfaction. Perpetual dissatisfaction finds its modern playground in these platforms. Men addicted to female validation online often find their offline relationships mirroring this hollow pursuit, never realizing that the emptiness stems not from lack of attention, but from the misguided belief that attention equates to value. Deeper danger is existential. A life lived in pursuit of external validation is a life lived inauthentically. Schopenhauer's notion of the veil of Maya, the illusion of appearances obscuring reality, resonates here. The man who seeks validation sees not the woman before him, but a distorted reflection of his own unmet needs. He interacts with a fantasy, not reality, perpetuating disconnection and dissatisfaction. Genuine connection requires presence, and presence requires self-sufficiency. Without it, relationships become transactional, performative, and ultimately hollow. Escaping this psychological trap demands a radical shift in self-perception. A man must redefine his source of worth from external approval to internal alignment. This involves cultivating self-awareness, embracing solitude, and engaging in practices that reinforce intrinsic value, such as creative expression, physical discipline, and philosophical reflection. Schopenhauer advocated for a life oriented toward inner richness rather than external accolades. By embodying this principle, a man gradually disentangles his self-worth from the volatile realm of others' opinions. Finally, breaking free requires courage. The path to emotional independence is uncomfortable because it confronts the ego's deepest fears: insignificance, rejection, and inadequacy. Yet, as Schopenhauer taught, these fears are born from illusions. Reality is indifferent to our cravings for recognition. True freedom arises when a man accepts this indifference and chooses to anchor his worth in something unshakable, his own being. Only then does he step out of the shadow of approval-seeking and into the light of authentic presence. The need for female validation is not a neutral habit. It has direct and severe consequences on a man's masculine identity. Schopenhauer's philosophy teaches that the individual enslaved to desire becomes a puppet of external forces, losing autonomy and clarity. In the context of relationships, a man who constantly seeks validation from women slowly erodes his masculine polarity. What once was confident leadership turns into tentative appeasement. What was once presence becomes anxious monitoring. The man shifts from acting with intention to reacting with fear, and in this reactive state he loses the essence of what makes him attractive in the first place. Masculine energy thrives on direction, stability, and self-possession. When a man's emotional state becomes contingent upon a woman's approval, he abdicates these qualities. His decisions become veiled negotiations. If I say this, will she like me more? His authenticity is sacrificed on the altar of perceived acceptance. Schopenhauer warned of this very dynamic, the loss of self when enslaved by the will's blind striving. The man's inner compass is replaced by a fragile antenna, always scanning for external signals, perpetually anxious, perpetually disempowered. This dependency also distorts his sense of boundaries. Fear of losing validation makes him tolerate behaviors and situations that compromise his self-respect. He avoids conflict, suppresses dissent, and bends his principles to maintain approval. However, every instance of boundary erosion chips away at his self-image, creating internal resentment. Schopenhauer's idea of the will being in constant conflict with reality applies here. The man's desire for harmony clashes with the reality of human imperfection, leading to frustration and disillusionment. Paradoxically, the more a man seeks validation, the less he receives it. Authentic attraction stems from self-assuredness, from a man's ability to be unapologetically himself. Neediness, however, signals scarcity and insecurity, triggering subconscious repulsion. Women attuned to emotional dynamics often sense when a man's affection is not an offering, but a plea for approval. Schopenhauer's principle that desire inherently creates suffering finds perfect illustration in this scenario. The very craving for validation ensures its absence, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of frustration. Beyond relationships, this need for validation weakens a man's ability to lead and influence. In professional settings, social circles, and personal endeavors, the man who constantly seeks approval becomes a follower rather than a leader. His opinions are diluted by the fear of offending, his actions constrained by the need to please. Schopenhauer's advocacy for intellectual and moral independence becomes a stark contrast to this submissive posture. True influence arises from conviction, not consensus. The man addicted to validation forfeits his ability to stand firm, to innovate, to command respect. Breaking free from this dynamic restores masculine polarity. When a man detaches his self-worth from external approval, his presence stabilizes. He communicates not to impress, but to express. His boundaries become non-negotiable, not as acts of defiance, but as expressions of self-respect. Schopenhauer's philosophy of detachment becomes a practical tool. By releasing the need for validation, a man regains his agency, his clarity, and his inherent attractiveness. He no longer chases approval, he embodies value. Ultimately, the journey away from seeking female validation is a journey towards self-ownership. It is a transition from external dependence to internal sovereignty. Schopenhauer's brutal honesty about human nature provides a map for this transformation. Stop expecting the world to affirm your worth. Start cultivating it within. The man, who does this not only liberates himself from a life of reactive anxiety, but becomes a beacon of authentic masculinity in a world starved for it. Escaping the need for female validation is not simply about resistance, it's about reconstruction. A man cannot just stop seeking approval without building a new foundation for his self-worth. Schopenhauer teaches that the will's blind desires must be understood and transcended, not merely suppressed. The same applies to validation seeking. It is not enough to avoid chasing external approval. One must cultivate internal value. This shift requires conscious effort, deliberate practices, and philosophical alignment with reality. Without this, the void left by discarded validation habits will pull the man back into the same patterns, disguised in new forms. The first pillar of this reconstruction is radical self-honesty. A man must confront the uncomfortable truths about his emotional triggers. Why do I crave her attention? What do I fear when I'm ignored? This introspection, while painful, dismantles the illusions that fuel dependence. Schopenhauer's method of stripping away comforting delusions to face the raw structure of reality applies perfectly. Through honest reflection, a man begins to separate his intrinsic value from external opinions, laying the groundwork for genuine self-respect. The second pillar is purposeful solitude. Emotional dependence thrives in noise and distraction. Solitude, however, forces a man to face himself without the crutch of external validation. Schopenhauer valued solitude as essential for philosophical clarity, viewing it not as loneliness, but as a necessary condition for self-knowledge. By intentionally spending time alone, reading, creating, training, the man cultivates an identity rooted in self-generated fulfillment. This solitude is not escapism. It is the crucible where authenticity is reforged. Another crucial step is cultivating mastery in chosen domains. Whether through professional excellence, artistic expression, or physical discipline, mastery builds self-worth from within. Achievements earned through personal effort cannot be taken away by fluctuating external opinions. Schopenhauer emphasized the importance of engaging with pursuits that enrich the mind and spirit, as these activities redirect the will's blind striving into meaningful channels. For the man shedding his need for validation, mastery becomes a stabilizing force, reinforcing the belief that his value is self-defined. Equally important is the redefinition of relationships. Instead of seeking partners to complete him, the emotionally independent man approaches relationships as spaces of mutual enrichment. Schopenhauer warned against idealizing others as sources of salvation. By recognizing the individuality and imperfection of each person, the man shifts from dependency to genuine connection. He no longer needs constant affirmation because his sense of self is intact. Relationships become choices, not emotional lifelines. Building a supportive male community also accelerates this transformation. Emotional dependence often stems from isolation, where a man lacks alternative sources of affirmation. Schopenhauer, though often solitary, valued intellectual discourse and the exchange of ideas among equals. Modern men benefit from surrounding themselves with peers who embody emotional resilience and challenge each other toward growth. This camaraderie offers a reality check, a mirror that reflects strengths and blind spots without the emotional volatility of romantic dynamics. Additionally, embodying a service-oriented mindset can shift the focus from receiving validation to creating value. Schopenhauer's philosophy of compassion, often overlooked, suggests that alleviating the suffering of others gives life a higher meaning. When a man engages in service, mentoring, teaching, creating, he redirects his attention from self-centered craving to purposeful contribution. This outward focus naturally diminishes the compulsive need for personal validation, fostering a deeper, more sustainable sense of worth. Ultimately, rebuilding self-worth without female validation is an act of reclaiming sovereignty. Schopenhauer's call to detach from the illusions of desire is not a path of emotional numbness, but of awakening. As the man steps out of the reactive loop of approval-seeking, he discovers a version of himself that is quieter, stronger, and free. His relationships improve not because he chases approval, but because he no longer needs it to feel complete. His presence becomes magnetic, not by force, but by authenticity. Emotional self-sufficiency is not merely the absence of need, it is the presence of inner abundance. Schopenhauer's teachings illuminate this principle by emphasizing that peace does not come from the satisfaction of desire, but from the mastery over it. For the man who has transcended the need for female validation, life opens up in ways previously obscured by insecurity. His interactions, once clouded by hidden agendas of approval-seeking, become clear, direct, and honest. He no longer enters relationships with the covert hope of being completed, but with the grounded presence of someone who is already whole. This self-sufficiency alters how a man is perceived. Women, friends, colleagues, all respond differently. To a man who is internally anchored, his detachment is not aloofness. It's the quiet confidence of someone who no longer measures his worth by external reactions. Schopenhauer's notion of the sage, detached yet fully engaged with life, finds practical expression here. The man becomes attractive not because he tries to be, but because he radiates authenticity, a rare and magnetic quality in a world obsessed with appearances. Moreover, emotional independence enhances decision-making. Without the distortion of seeking approval, a man's choices align more closely with his values and long-term goals. He is less likely to compromise his principles for short-term validation, making him a more reliable leader, partner, and friend. Schopenhauer's emphasis on intellectual and moral independence resonates strongly. By freeing oneself from the tyranny of external opinions, one gains clarity, decisiveness, and integrity. These are the hallmarks of true masculine power. The benefits extend to emotional resilience. Rejection, criticism, and disapproval, once sources of anxiety, lose their sting. The emotionally independent man understands that such experiences reflect more about the other person than himself. This perspective, grounded in Schopenhauer's philosophy, fosters equanimity, a calmness that cannot be shaken by the whims of external validation. In this state, the man becomes unreactive, not from indifference but from inner stability. Relationships themselves transform. Free from the need to extract validation, the man engages with women from a place of genuine curiosity and respect. He no longer burdens the relationship with unrealistic expectations of completing his self-worth. Instead, he offers presence, leadership, and authenticity. Paradoxically, this detachment deepens connection, as it removes the pressure of constant approval and allows for organic, honest relating. Schopenhauer's wisdom is clear. By relinquishing the illusion of control over others' perceptions, one gains true relational freedom. This inner transformation also enhances creativity and purpose. The energy once wasted on managing impressions and seeking validation is redirected toward meaningful pursuits. Whether through artistic expression, entrepreneurial ventures, or philosophical exploration, the man channels his focus into building, creating, and contributing. Schopenhauer's life, despite his pessimism, was marked by profound intellectual output, an example of how detachment from social validation can fuel deep, meaningful work. Ultimately, emotional self-sufficiency is the foundation of a fulfilled life. It liberates the man from the exhausting cycle of external dependency, granting him the freedom to live, love, and lead on his own terms. Schopenhauer's philosophy does not offer escapism. It demands facing reality without illusions. But in doing so, it provides the tools for genuine empowerment. The man who no longer seeks to be validated by others discovers that the only approval he truly needed was his own. In the relentless pursuit of female validation, countless men unknowingly exchange their inner power for fleeting moments of external approval, perpetuating a cycle of self-betrayal that Schopenhauer dissected with merciless precision centuries ago. His philosophy reveals a simple yet uncomfortable truth. As long as your worth depends on how others perceive you, you are not free, you are a servant to illusions. Every glance you chase, every compliment you crave, is another link in the invisible chain binding you to insecurity, neediness, and quiet desperation. But this is not your inevitable fate. The path to emotional independence begins with a radical act of self-honesty, acknowledging that no woman, no relationship, no amount of external attention will ever fill the void of unaddressed inner wounds. Schopenhauer's call to detach from the blind striving of the will is not a rejection of love or connection. It is an invitation to reclaim your sovereignty. When you stop seeking to be completed by others, you begin to engage with life. And, with women, from a place of genuine wholeness. This transformation shifts the very foundation of your relationships. No longer driven by the fear of not being enough, you approach connection as a choice, not a necessity. You express rather than impress. You set boundaries, not walls. And paradoxically, by ceasing to chase validation, you become infinitely more magnetic, respected, and desired, not because you manipulated perception, but because you finally aligned with your authentic self. This journey demands courage. It requires you to embrace discomfort, to sit with moments of insignificance without flinching, to build your worth through self-discipline, purpose, and aligned action. Schopenhauer did not sugarcoat the human condition. He offered clarity amidst the noise of delusion. And in that clarity lies your power. Imagine living each day unburdened by the need to be liked, free from the exhausting dance of approval seeking. Imagine relationships where you are valued, not for your appeasement but for your presence. That reality is not a distant dream. It begins with the choice to stop outsourcing your worth. The uncomfortable, inconvenient truth is this: you are the only one who can validate yourself. Everything else is noise. If this message struck a chord, if you recognize these patterns in your own life and are ready to reclaim your power, this channel is for you. Subscribe now, hit the like button, and share this video with a brother who needs this wake-up call. Together, we're not building fake confidence. We're building real men, men who no longer seek to be chosen because they have already chosen themselves.